you first walked in. So before we get started, I do have to list a couple of brief safety reminders. The first one is please make sure that you hang on to your personal belongings while we're standing here and leaning over the edge. You would not believe what we find dropped in this exhibit, from coins, cameras, cell phones. A few weeks ago we found a whole melon. So just very strange things. And our birds are very curious creatures, and so it's likely that they're going to find it before I can get to it, and we'd really prefer that they didn't swallow anything that might be able to harm them. So again, please keep a tight hold of your personal belongings. The second thing is that there is no gum chewing here at the New England Aquarium. This is because gum has a tendency to get stuck in penguin feathers when it falls in the tank. Very scary, and if you've ever had gum stuck in your hair, you know just how stressful that experience is. So again, if you have gum, please get rid of it. But with both of those safety announcements out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. I am currently standing in 150,000 gallons of salt water filtered in from the Boston Harbor every day. We filter it and clean it when we don't heat it up. So it is a balmy 58 degrees in the water right now, which is why our aquarists, while we care for our penguins, wear not one, but 2 layers of wetsuits as well as a pair of wool socks to make sure that we stay warm while we're here in the exhibit caring for our birds. We're lucky enough to care for over 85 penguins here on the exhibit, including the little blues that you see to my left, the southern rockhoppers all the way around the back, and of course, the African penguins that you see me here standing with. We also have a grand total of 6 fiberglass islands that our birds are free to rest on, play on, kind of do whatever they want on, just like they would have in the wild. But of course, since these are such a popular hangout spot, we spend a lot of time cleaning them. The majority of the morning is devoted to cleaning these islands. We scrub them from top to bottom, and then we apply a layer of veterinary disinfectant. You'll also notice that each of these islands has a set of black discs. What these actually are is a sprinkler system, and it comes on 3 times a day, helps us wash off any guano or excess penguin poop off the island into the water so that it can be then filtered out. But of course, a sprinkler system can only do so much, so we do the majority of it by hand with a hose and a grout brush the old-fashioned way. And because of this, it is a very physically tasking job. So we like to joke that as long as I work here in the penguin department, I will never need a health club membership anywhere. But fortunately, it's not all work and no play here in the penguin department. We do get a chance to interact with our birds on a regular basis. They're fed twice a day, once at 9 o'clock in the morning and once at 2:30 in the afternoon. So if you stick around, you'll get to see it. Today is capelin, which is a big favorite, so it should be a pretty good feed for us today. But we also feed a variety of fish to make sure that we round out their nutritional profile, including smelt, anchovies, herring, and just to make sure that they get all of those vitamins and minerals that they really, really need. So we also let the birds eat as much as they want, and then they tell us when they're full. But what this means is that we need to track how many fish each bird has eaten so that we can track the long-term trends of their eating habits to make sure nothing's going wrong with our birds and to make sure their eating is staying at a healthy level. So the implication here, though, is that we then need to be able to tell all of our birds apart from one another. And if you were to look at one of our birds just standing here on the island, it's kind of hard to say who that bird might be. But the way that we tell them apart here at the aquarium is actually quite simple. If you'll notice, each bird has a bracelet either on the left or on the right wing. And this tells me one of 2 things. The first is whether this penguin is a male or a female. As it turns out, penguins are not what's called sexually dimorphic, which means you can't tell the boys from the girls just by looking at them. What we actually have to do is we take a small blood sample from them when they're very young. We send that blood away for DNA results. That DNA then comes back to us, and then we know if we're looking at a boy or a girl. And at that point, they'll get their official bracelet either on the left or on the right wing. All of our male penguins here in the exhibit have their bracelets on the left wing, and all of our females have their bracelets on the right, because of course the ladies are always right. So the second thing this bracelet tells me about our penguins is exactly which penguin I'm looking at. So the way that we do this is, if you'll notice that each bracelet has a little bit of a different color combination on it. And I have memorized names associated with each one of these color combinations. And it's relatively simple to pick up. So if you told me, all right, it's an African penguin with a pink bracelet on the left, I would tell you that's Pip. Or if you said, no, it's a little blue penguin with a brown bracelet on the right, I would tell you that's Australia. So it's a pretty easy system. And if you want to learn more about it and which penguin you're looking at, you can go to each one of these touchscreen computers that we have in the corners of our exhibit, and you can punch in the code colors that you see, and it'll tell you a little bit more about which bird you're looking at, how they got their name, things like that. So it's very interesting. The last thing that I always like to mention though about these bracelets that some people are keen enough to pick up on is that a lot of times you'll have to see two birds with a matching bracelet color. So if you look at the very top of this rock, these are my classic example. They are beach donkey and Halifax. And beach donkey and Halifax have a set of matching bracelets. They both have a green and white bracelet. And what this means is that in the eyes of the aquarium, they are a mated pair. So they are part of our breeding program and will have chicks on a regular basis for us. But you know, the textbooks will tell you that penguins mate for life, but this isn't necessarily always the case. It's more like 80% of the time. It's a little bit like the young and the restless around here. We do have spats between lovers and fights and all sorts of things, all kinds of drama. So it's really interesting to watch our birds as they play out these social scenarios. So that pretty much covers it for what we do here in the exhibit on a regular basis. Does anyone have any questions at this point about what my job is or what we're doing here in the exhibit? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the question is, how do penguins swim in the water? And this is actually a really good question. So a lot of times birds and diving birds will use their feet to paddle them through the water. Think like ducks or you know, any of those sorts of creatures. But penguins actually fly through the water. They use their wings, and they don't use their feet to power them at all, just to steer. So it's their wings that get them through the water, not their feet, which is a really interesting thing about penguins. Alrighty. Well, with that being said, let's keep moving right along. So I figured at this point we talk a little bit about penguins in the wild. So there are 18 species of penguins in the wild, and every single last one of those birds can be found in the southern hemisphere. But this doesn't necessarily mean that they're all found on the icy shoals of Antarctica. In fact, the majority of penguins are actually much warmer weather birds. All of the birds we have here on exhibit are considered temperate climate penguins, which means that they live in very warm areas such as off the coast of South Africa, Australia and Tasmania and New Zealand, Argentina and Chile with our rockhoppers, so very warm places. That's why you don't see a lot of snow or ice in our exhibit. If we were to put that in here, they'd be very uncomfortable. They'd much prefer a rocky shoal or a beach to anything snow-covered. So, you know, despite the large range of penguins, however, there is one thing that links them all together, and that is cold water. Penguins need cold water to survive, because as it turns out, cold water is more highly oxygenated than warmer water. So if you have a highly oxygenated water system, you have more fish in that environment, and more fish means, of course, there's going to be a penguin population there to take care of it. So that's why global warming is really becoming a detriment to these birds. As the water gets warmer, their food source is starting to move away to find colder water, and the penguins are having to go after it. So that's again why global warming is such an effect for these birds. So, you know, because our penguins live in such cold water, they're having to do a lot of diving, right, to find their food. But if you were to look on a penguin, and so they're going to do a lot of swimming, but if you look to see one of our penguins just on land, you might not see a very athletic animal, right? You see sort of a clumsy, waddling creature that's, you know, a little chubby. In fact, penguins even get their name from the Latin word penguinus, which means fat. But if you look a little bit closer, I think you'll find that there's a lot more to penguins than meets the eye. They are incredible swimmers and divers. Penguins, in fact, are the fastest swimming, longest diving birds in the entire animal kingdom. And in fact, the longest dive recorded for a penguin was by an emperor penguin who held a single breath for 22 minutes. And the longest dive for a penguin is also by an emperor penguin, thanks to that lung capacity, who dove to a depth of 1,800 feet. That's 6 times what even our best human divers would even attempt, so really incredible. But how is it that they're doing this incredible diving behavior? Well, it's one of 2 things. The first is that penguins have what's called a dive reflex. And what this is that when cold water hits the face of the bird, it actually slows their heartbeat to about half of what it would be on land. And in this way, they are incredibly oxygen efficient. And I bet you didn't know that humans actually do this too. If I were to splash you in the face with cold water, your heartbeat would slow down too as a reflex. But we just don't do it nearly as well as our penguins, who are more in the habit of having to dive for their food. The second thing that our penguins have that helps them do this incredible diving is a very unique set of bones. Many people have heard about how birds have hollow bones, but this is really only helpful if you're going to fly somewhere. If you've ever tried to submerge something that's filled with air, you know how difficult that can be, right? Very hard to get it to sink. So our penguins have developed a a set of solid bones, which they use as an anchor or a ballast to help them sink further into the water and catch those fish at deeper depths. In fact, scientists right now are even finding out that there are some species of penguins that may even be swallowing stones to make themselves heavier so that they can sink further into the water. So if that's what they're doing, that's a really incredible adaptation that they've managed to figure out. So because our penguins are doing so much diving in this frigid, cold water, they've obviously got to have some way to keep warm, right? And the way that they do this is with their incredible feathers. Penguin feathers are awesome. The first thing is that they are waterproof. In fact, a lot of times you'll see our birds on the islands cleaning their feathers or preening and straightening to make sure that they're all in a line. But the other thing that they're doing is they're actually giving themselves a wax job. Penguins secrete a waxy substance above the base of the tail, which they regularly coat onto their feathers to make sure that no water can seep in between the cracks. The second thing that's really cool about penguin feathers is that they are incredibly dense. So if you were to hold your hand up in the sign of an OK, that space in the middle there is about a square inch. Now imagine that you packed about 80 feathers into that square space. That's about the average for one of our average penguins here. And an emperor penguin might even have 120 feathers in that square space. This is Luteritz. Luteritz loves to chase the shadows that my hands make. So he's going to ham it up a little bit for you. So penguin feathers are really also unique because they give those penguins that classic tuxedo look, that very formal looking attire. And what this is in fact not just a formal occasion here at the aquarium, it is a very sophisticated form of camouflage called counter shading. So for a moment, let's all imagine that we are diving in the ocean. Now we see a penguin swim underneath of us, thank you Luteritz, and what you see is that black back facing up towards you, right? Pretty hard to see against the dark ocean floor. Now imagine that you turned your eyes to the surface and you see that same penguin swim above you. Now you see that penguin's white belly, right? Again, pretty hard to see against that whiter sky. And the penguins have done this on purpose. In this way, they're much harder to spot by both their prey and their predators. So because our penguin feathers are so important, they do try to keep them in as best shape as possible. But unfortunately, Mother Nature does take a toll on their feathers, and they do kind of get beat up from time to time. So, the way a normal bird would deal with this is they would molt out a single feather here and there as they needed new feathers. But because we know so much about how penguins need to stay waterproof and need those feathers to stay warm, does it make sense that they be able to just casually drop a feather here and there? Not really. So what penguins actually have developed is something called a catastrophic molt, which sounds awful, but what it actually is a period of 2 weeks during which the penguin gets rid of all of its old feathers and replaces them with a brand new set. And what happens is when the penguin feels this molt period coming on, they will eat and eat and eat and eat like it is going out of style. Pack on those calories because they know for 2 weeks they're not going to be waterproof, right? They're going to have to stay on the island and live off of those fat reserves that they've stored up previously. And if you look at, well, we don't have any Africans molting right now, but almost every single last one of our little blues is in the middle of their molt right now, and they're looking pretty scrappy and uncomfortable. But I guarantee if you came back in about 2 weeks, they are all going to look beautiful again and be ready to swim and go back to their normal behavior. So, we talked a lot about how penguins swim and how they eat and how they live, but we haven't talked a lot about how penguins drink. So you might be thinking to yourself, now, how is it that a marine bird can find a source of fresh water to drink? And as it turns out, penguins don't have to. They can actually drink the salt water. And the way that they do this is they have a gland located behind the beak and above the eyes that actually allows them to draw salt out of the bloodstream, filter it down the nose, through the sinuses, and out the beak in a salt sneeze. And a lot of times you'll see our birds do this just as they're coming up off the island or after they've eaten a pretty salty fish. And in this way, they can regulate the amount of salt that's in their body at any given time. So they're comfortable drinking the seawater, eating those salty fishes, and being totally all right with that. So that pretty much covers it for our penguin adaptations. Does anyone have any questions about penguins in the wild? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the question is, why do penguins drink salt water? So penguins drink salt water because they don't have any fresh water to drink. They're all marine birds, they live in the ocean, so all this is salt water, right? That's all they've got. So they've just managed to adapt and figure out how to work with what they've got. Any other questions? Sure. So the question is, what is the main predator of penguins in the wild? And actually, this is awesome because this leads right into what I'm about to talk about next. In the wild, penguins threat to penguin populations in the wild is humans. Okay, so 13 of those 18 species of penguins are either considered threatened or endangered because of human effects. And in fact, those African penguins that you see me standing here with right now are expected to go extinct, gone in the wild in just 10 years. That's it, 10 years. And that's it. But of course, this is if nothing changes. And I know we can fix this because there's so many things that we can do locally and at home to make sure that our penguins stick around with us for much longer than that. Things like turning off your lights so we can reduce the effects of global warming like we talked about, making sure that water stays cold. Learning more about sustainable seafood so that we know we're not taking anchovies and capelin away from those birds who need it. And then finally, of course, water is a system. So making sure that we are participating in our local waterway efforts to make sure that that water stays clean globally. And finally, you should all be very, very proud of yourselves because just by buying a ticket here to the aquarium today, you've helped with the positive contribution and rehabilitation of these species through the aquarium's work with the Species Survival Plan. So I and the penguins thank you very, very much for coming to visit us here on this rainy day. If you have any further questions, I am happy to answer them now, and I'll be in the exhibit for a little while longer. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a wonderful day here at the New England Aquarium. Thank you. Do you have a question? Okay. Okay, so the question was, has the staff ever been bitten by the penguins? The answer to that is absolutely yes. We get bitten a lot. Their beaks are pretty sharp, and usually it's just them looking for a fish or something like that, but they're not exactly super coordinated with their beaks, and it does happen, and that's how they interact with one another too, is just by kind of biting and snapping, so, just something we deal with. But any other questions at this point? Why are they black and white? Okay, so the question was, why are they black and white? And this has to do with, it's like actually a form of camouflage. So when you look at a penguin diving in the ocean, when you look down on its back, you see that black bent back against the murky floor of the ocean, right? And so that's pretty hard to see. If it was, maybe blue or brown down there in the ocean floor. Now, if you imagine it swimming above you, again, you see its white belly against the sky. And again, that's really hard for its prey or its predators to see. So that's why actually a lot of marine birds like puffins or other diving animals, you'll see have that counter shading effect. So, yeah. Sure, go ahead. Do penguins groom each other? Yes, they do. They absolutely do. A lot of our mated pairs will find, especially when one or the other of them is molting, will help the others pluck, there you go, will help the others pluck feathers off of the other, where places they can't reach. So they do groom each other quite a bit. Halifax and Beach Donkey are going to give you a lovely example of penguins grooming one another. So that's convenient. Any other questions? How cold is the water? Water is about 58 degrees right now, so it's pretty darn chilly. It's about the same temperature it is in the harbor, and during the winter it'd be about 50 degrees, so pretty chilly. Any other questions? Go ahead, yeah. Okay, so the question was, where do the penguins originally come from? So our penguins here, these guys, these African penguins, they come from South Africa, so off the coast of South Africa. It's pretty warm, they live on the beach. Our little blue penguins over there come from Australia, so again, a pretty warm area, right? And then the rock hoppers around the back, they come from Chile and Argentina, which is in South America. So again, pretty warm places, yeah. Any other questions? What do they eat? So our penguins in the wild, they would eat anything from any small fishes to some squids, different crustaceans, kind of whatever they could get their hands on. Here, today, we're going to feed them capelin, which is a small fish, but we also feed anchovies, sardines, herring, and smelt to make sure that they get a lot of different variety to their diet. Yeah, go ahead. his left wing. So if you happen to spot Alfred, say, hey, he's an old man, and he deserves all the best in the world, so. Yes, sometimes, the question is, do they ever snap at us? And sometimes they do. That's sort of how penguins interact with one another, and that's how they interact with us too. So we do try to avoid getting bitten though. Yeah. Yes, the penguins do swim. They swim very well. Alrighty, any other questions? I do have to wrap up here shortly because we've got another talk coming on. This water's about 3 feet deep. It gets about 5 foot deep over there, so it gets a little bit harder to stand, but this is about the most shallow. Alrighty. Well, wonderful. I thank you so much for stopping by to see us on this rainy afternoon. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to stop any of us in the exhibit. We'll be more than happy to answer them. Oh, one more. Do we allow the penguins to have eggs? This is a great question. Great question. Yeah, we do in fact. A lot of our penguins, I won't say all of them, but a lot of them are involved in breeding. What we do is when they're about to breed,